In the credit card industry, this was founded over a decade ago, the particular information as far as how to handle the data within the credit card processing industry itself. The common companies it relates to, obviously, banking, financial, retail, e-commerce, restaurants, healthcare. But it's even more than that, because there are, give you a great example. We worked with the organization that handles all the transactions for everybody who orders their lunches for their kids at school, okay? So how many of you have gone online through your phone and purchased lunch money for your kids at school? Guessing a whole bunch of you have, right? It's pretty common. And it might be Saturday night at 11 o'clock and you remember to do it, right? So it's a 7 by 24 by 365 type of thing. Well, in order to do that, that company that's accepting you and those schools that are accepting you have to meet the compliance of PCI. And your mobile phone provider with that whole transaction may have to meet that depending on where the data goes and how it's transferred and how you're accessing it. Okay? So it's a pretty common component out there. Related to facilities, having the media stored in a backup location, a secure backup location. So having redundant access to that information in the case of a failure is a critical thing here. Okay? Reviewing the location's security annually. So how many of you in here do an annual security assessment of your data center? Okay. How many of you do an annual assessment of the risks on your data center? Okay, so we got a few people. Those are key things that you're going to find related to compliance and regulatory, that if you happen to have somebody come walking in and want to look at your facility and think they're going to fine you, if you can show that you've been performing a risk assessment, you've been showing a compliance assessment, the odds of you saying, okay, here's where we are, and we know we have some issues, and we're going to fix them, and here's when we are, the less you're going to see. Now, I'll give you a worst-case example of this one in particular. Working with an organization, went in, found out for that the last 4 years they have failed this, and they never put any effort to it. They were fined $36 million over that 5-year period. Okay? They could have replaced the whole data center for that amount of fines, right? But it was because they were very complacent. And they didn't track anything, and they didn't look at what it was, and they didn't see what their risk was and other factors, right? So that's one thing I would recommend related to compliance. At least perform a risk assessment or a compliance assessment to know what issues you have before management comes down with some compliance regulatory fine, and here you are in the data center, and they're coming to you and asking you all these questions, and why are we not compliant? Why are we not meeting these situations, right? But on the operations side, it really comes down to the network and controlling the inbound and outbound traffic on your network and making sure that anything related to credit card processing, financial processing is separated. And any data you have needs to be encrypted not only in motion but also at rest, okay? Which is also pretty common with compliancy. And a lot of people encrypt it one or the other. Some people are now starting to encrypt it both ways, okay? But you've got to be able to understand that so that you can keep it specifically non-holder, non-cardholder data and information needs to be separated from cardholder information, okay? It gets a little more complicated when you start setting up your network and you start looking at your firewalls and you start looking at your security within the data center from a digital access kind of point of view, okay? PCI is almost as big as it is with the IRS. And last client we did, there were 150 different items that related to PCI from a transaction. Now, some of them are real simple. Guard, sign in, check driver's license for access, you know, something like that for ID. But there's a lot of other ones in here, okay? And again, you're going to see a lot of them that talk about cardholder data and how cardholder data is handled, okay? Because how many breaches have we had with cardholder data? Who remembers one a couple years ago with Target Corporation? Which wasn't even Target's fault, by the way. It was the transaction device that they purchased from another vendor. It was that vendor's who was the issue, but Target took the hit. The CEO was resigned and walked away. I mean, major company with a lot of entities, right? And that's one of how many we've probably heard of. That's one that made the news quite significantly, right? Protecting the systems, again, antivirus. I mean, these are basic types of things. Restricting physical access to the locations where you house that cardholder data. So in a store situation, if there's anybody here in a retail environment, if you're storing data at the store and then transmitting at a later date to the data center, you've got an issue at that store point where you might have to meet it for encrypted data. Whether that's a restaurant, you know, a store, a hospital, any of those could have places where they're storing that data that ultimately gets to the data center.